Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We will get started in just a couple of minutes. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We will get started very shortly. All right, welcome everyone to Feeding Communities, Big Challenges, Local Actions. My name is Emily Hostetler. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an educator at the Museum of Science. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Let's begin with some logistics. If you'd like to see captions, you can click on the closed caption button and select Show Subtitle. We will keep all participants' audio and videos off for the duration of the panel discussion. If you'd like to submit a question for our panel, you can click the chat button and send in your questions to me, Emily Hostetler, and we'll send them to our moderator. After the panel, you will have an opportunity to move into small breakout group conversations to dive a little deeper into what is discussed. If you choose to stay for those conversations, we will be offering you a $50 e-gift card as an appreciation for your time with us. I would like to take this time to thank the Tufts Clinical and Translational Science Institute for being such a fantastic partner and collaborator on this project. I would also like to thank the National Institute of Health and the Lowell Institute for supporting this program today. I would now turn it over to our museum president, Tim Richie, who would like to welcome you all here tonight.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. I am Tim Richie. My pronouns are he and his, and it's a pleasure to welcome our community and to folks from around the world, perhaps, to this discussion, which is one, in a sense, we wish we didn't have to have. We live in a world that is abundant with the technology and the science and the resources where no one needs to be hungry. What could be more primal than hunger? What could be more primal than food? And food should be a celebration of our community life together. And yet there are structures and there are systems that do prevent people from getting the food they need. And we will explore that tonight through our excellent panel and moderator. I'd like to reemphasize what Emily said, the partnership with Tufts and the challenge to translate basic science, translating science into interventions that benefit people and communities is something that Tufts has been trying to do for a very long time, and we as well want to be a part of that conversation. The Museum of Science wants to be relevant to the needs around us, and this is certainly one of the great needs of our day. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator. We're really fortunate to have Laura Riley here. She is the Business of Food reporter for the Washington Post. She was previously a food critic at the Tampa Bay Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Baltimore Sun, and has been nominated for Pulitzer Prizes and was also a James Beard finalist in 2017 and 2019. And what she focuses on now is the issues of food ethics and safety, sustainability, and food waste. You should follow her on Twitter. There's so much that we can all learn about ourselves as we see how we deal with food in our communities, in our nations, and in our world. So over to you, Laura, and thank you so much for being
here. Hey all, unfortunately, I can't make my video go on. I don't know what is going on here.
We will take care of that. If Janine, if you could ask her to start her video, that would be lovely. Sorry about that, Laura.
I'm working on it. It wouldn't be a Zoom event without some technical difficulties.
Exactly. I just don't have the option of video for some reason.
I'm so sorry. I'm looking to make it happen. Oh, we were there. We had you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. Let's hope that's the only glitch of the evening. So we have an exciting group of panelists today to address kind of the policy, the community, the research sides of food justice issues. And I'm not going to introduce them each with a lengthy thing, but I'm just going to give them a cursory beginning, and you will get to know them a little bit better over the next 45 minutes or so. So we have Jen Feigl, who is the executive director and co-founder of the Commonwealth Kitchen, and she is welcomed. Hey, she did a much better job than I did. We have Greg Watson, who is the director for policy and systems design at Schumacher Center for New Economics. Welcome, Greg. We have Norbert Wilson, who is a professor of food economics and community at Duke University. Wonderful. Are we all in the house here? Are we missing Greg? Oh, here he is. All right. Well, so I think that one thing that might be helpful given our audience, and our audience may have a wide array of understanding of these issues, is if we just start with defining some terms. So food justice is something that maybe a lot of people haven't thought about, and I would love to get your kind of your take on how you define that for the uninitiated. And then even the term food insecurity, if we can drill down a little bit and talk about what that means, obviously in the context of COVID, but in a broader sense, how is it not exactly equivalent to hunger? And maybe Norbert, do we want to start with you? Do you have thoughts on either of those two things just to kind of orient us?
Sure, glad to join. And thank you for this opportunity to share with the Museum of Science. I used to live in Boston. I'll just make this one quick statement. I've taken a group of fourth graders to the Museum of Science, so I'm a big fan and I'm really appreciative of the work that they all do. This issue of food justice and thinking about issues around food security are really important, and they're vital. And as Tim mentioned earlier, it's almost shocking that we even have to have this conversation. But when we talk about food justice, the Museum of Science has put out a really interesting pamphlet describing some of these issues. But the way I think about food justice is, it is that all people have an equal access to safe, nutritious, sustainable foods. That these foods should reflect their lives, their culture, their identity. That food should be a part of well-being of all society. When those things happen, I think we have a just and equitable food system. When they don't happen, I think there are things that we need to do. And some of our colleagues here on this panel have done some of that important work to help move that forward. I will stop there, and I will gladly love to hear what other people have to say about food justice, and maybe we can talk about food security, which is a separate idea, but I think it's also important to kind of keep them maybe a little separate.
Greg, do you want to kind of add on to what Norbert began here?
Sure, and that was a great characterization, Norbert. I will bring in the concept of food sovereignty to kind of sort of frame this as well, because I think in terms of, it touches both a little bit on justice and security, because I think what we find is that people who have not had access, right, to fresh, nutritious food locally also have not had access to the means of production. And, you know, being able to make decisions about not just having food, but the type of food. And it touched on it, some of it can be cultural, but a lot of it may also be the quality of the food and where it comes from. So I think that food justice is, in fact, recognizing, understanding that there are real phenomenon out there, whether you agree with the term, for instance, food desert or not. I have a colleague who prefers to use food apartheid because she said desert. Sounds like it's a natural occurring event, but nonetheless, that should not happen. And as we try to resolve these or address these, we should also keep in mind that it does include things like having more control over your food supply and system as well.
So Jen, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. But I know you're from your perspective, there's a little more about kind of access to capital and kind of the business side of things. And I'd love to see what you would like to add to this in that context.
Sure, thank you. I would just say that, the challenge in our food system is that it is this complex system, and there's so many siloed pieces to it. And so, Norbert did a beautiful job of talking about one piece of those of us as eaters. What does justice mean to us, which is about access and right, that it's affordable to us. That doesn't mean that affordability is a whole other topic we could talk about. But when you think about the entirety of the system, our work is thinking about, well, how do we create opportunity all along the supply chain? So, Greg sort of got at the farmers, land for farmers, training for farmers. How are we, the farm workers, how are we treating them, right? How are we thinking about wages? Certainly in the last year, you think about like people working in meat factories, like, oh my goodness, all the way through to some of the work we do with things like restaurants, small businesses. How do we support them? And particularly in communities of color where access to information, to resources, to networks, and to capital are some of the biggest challenges for those businesses. And this is the same, I think, across when you think about the food justice issue. The access is really like where we need to start to level that playing field, because we don't have equal access to the resources, including the healthy food.
So I definitely want to come back to the farmer component of this a little bit later, but I think it might be a good place to start to talk about the ways in which policy provides impediments to food equity and certainly in terms of food access. So we've just come through a period of greater food insecurity than probably most of us have, seen in our lifetime. Perhaps the Great Depression was worse. That Dust Bowl did a lot of damage in terms of food access. But just in the past couple of weeks, we've seen incredible policy change aimed at getting food and benefits swiftly to people in need. So can we talk a little bit about how policy in the past 4 years may have made things difficult on some fronts and kind of what's happening now? And whoever would like to kind of start us off.
Well, let me, if I may, since I jumped in first, can I just take it back even? I want to go back a little further than 4 years, because I want to make sure that people understand policy has created sort of a situation that a lot of us have sort of taken as givens, but they were actually policy decisions. And what I mean by that is back in the 1970s, when Earl Butz was Secretary of Agriculture under Ronald Reagan, there was a conscious decision to support big farms, corporate farms, get big or get out. It was not a matter of small farms being economically inefficient or non-competitive. It was a conscious decision. And that decision, which moving it forward, ties into what we're experiencing today. And that is the big corporate farm model. The market for that was not Main Street, not you and I, it was Wall Street. We were growing food to address the deficit. We were growing lots of grain, commodity crops to export. So the system got skewed. I don't think it's a matter of science that we have to figure out how to do things. We can always improve, but policy has always been a part of that. And then I'm going to let folks take these more recent 4 years when we get into distribution and access and the assistance programs tied to the Farm Bill, that becomes an issue as well.
So Greg, before we move on, I want to ask you though, so if it was get big or get out, under Earl Butz, et cetera, and farms have become ever more productive, larger and larger, ever more productive, ever more mechanized, why is it that food insecurity, we haven't kind of chipped away at that? Where's that disconnect?
Well, the food security piece, there are two pieces of that. They've gotten better. They've also gotten more environmentally harmful. But again, remember, the food, we have folks, and I remember a story about a farmer in Texas, and in the middle of the crisis, he said, you know what, I'm going to change my practices. I don't know how to grow food that we eat. The food that we eat here in this region in Massachusetts, the U.S. Department of Agriculture refers to it as specialty crops. And so even that designation sort of suggests that the main focus, once again, is lots of food being grown, lots of food for export, not to feed people in the country. We won't get to this, but even now, the average distance of food travels is about 1,500 miles, right, to get from farm to table, which means it's not locally accessible, and it's skewed in terms of who the market and who where the focus of the food delivered is in this country.
Norbert, were you going to say something?
Yeah, this is a really big and complex story, and I would say there is a definite policy side. There is the economics of ag production, and we know that it is really a difficult industry to be successful. It takes a great deal of work. There has been a tendency toward expansion, larger farms, for drives towards efficiency. And I think we can have lots of discussion around that issue, but policy does play a role in promoting that. I will say there are a number of folks who find it really difficult when you think about some of the historical development of ag policies that promoted the production of many of our staple crops or row crops, where there weren't really opportunities to grow fruits and vegetables as a part of that because of the way those programs were structured. So there were a number of reasons that we see the agriculture that we see today. And also just the development of the food manufacturing industry. It's not like everyone is taking home whole foods when they go home. Rather, they're buying many processed products, and that processing needed certain inputs. So this is it's a big story, and it's a complex story. But why do we still find people that are food insecure? And part of the reason why I pushed off talking about food security is because it comes out of a very narrowly defined way when the U.S. Department of Agriculture defines food insecurity. It's talking about people answering a set of questions in a particular way to say whether or not they're food insecure. And I think it can get kind of muddled in terms of thinking about that as, is it hunger, or are we talking about something else? And so we talked about this continuum of food justice and food sovereignty. And then there's this idea of food security, where people are having limited access to food. It's not that they're limited in access, and it can be physical, but it's typically financial. Folks just don't have the resources to buy the foods that they need. Yes, there are some challenges with food access in terms of the availability of grocery stores, or taking it home, having to use public transportation depending on where you are. But the fact that individuals can't afford to buy food is a significant problem. And so when we fail to appreciate that, when we fail to understand the economic circumstances that lead to folks not being able to meet their food needs, I think we're missing out on the real challenge of food security. Policies that fail to provide adequate support, either through wages or through programs like SNAP or WIC, or people not being able to access those programs, are important impediments for folks struggling with food access issues.
So I think just in the past week, we've seen some interesting and very hopeful work being done. You know, we saw pandemic EBT be extended through the summers, through next summer, actually. We've seen the expansion of SNAP. We've seen, today I saw WIC also is expanded for the next 4 months. There will be like 3x the amount of money for fruits and veg through WIC, which for people who don't know is the, women and infants and toddler food assistance program. And then school lunch too is also in this. We've just announced kind of universal free school lunch kind of till the end of the pandemic, till the end of the emergency. But I think it's the kind of thing that'll be really hard to walk back. But I think we kind of, a minute ago, were touching on the idea of farm subsidies a little bit. We were kind of getting at that. And I would love to talk a little bit about how farm subsidies historically may have skewed things and made things harder for specialty crop farmers or small farmers or farmers of color. If, Jen, if you have thoughts on that front you'd like to hop in on.
I'm actually going to pass it to my friend Greg, because I think he probably has way better to say about this one. You can get me later.
You know what they say, you can fool some of the people some of the time, right? No, thanks, Jen. No, well, when you think, and subsidies issue and the subsidies scene has changed and has shifted a lot in the last number of years. But you're absolutely right. For the longest time, that distinction between commodity crops and specialty crops was significant because it was the commodity crops that qualified for most of the subsidies, the big subsidies, right? And so the farmer, and ranging from, again, think about water. Think about, the shift of agriculture out to the west, to California. Without the water subsidies, there would be no California agriculture. The Colorado River dries up before it empties into the Gulf now because of the draw and the demand on water from these large farms. Recently, California has become the largest dairy industry state. Used to be Minnesota, Wisconsin, right? But it's now moved all out there. So what we had here especially in, I will say, the Northeast for the most part, because you get those subsidies also down in the South, right? Because you do have those row crops, you've got commodity crops growing there. We have to rely on what was almost the equivalent of block grants that would come into us mostly for marketing. We'd have to rely upon, again, sort of what was more or less some crumbs were thrown out for research and development. Fortunately, the farm, and that all this sort of is crafted in that farm bill, this big omnibus bill that gets, every 5 years, people debate, and it becomes a very hot political thing. But that was a distinction for a long time. And now I think this, with the realization of the importance of concepts like resilient or regenerative agriculture, even organic agriculture, which when I got involved in this many years ago, you didn't talk organic. I mean, sometimes people forget the progress that has been made in the past. I'm dating myself here now, 40 or some odd years. So anyway, that's a distinction, but I think we're seeing that shift as people's perspectives and understanding of agriculture, and particularly the environmental and the economic impacts it's having on people and the earth.
Greg, can you just unpack for people who may not know what regenerative ag is? Can you just give us like a couple sentences, definition there?
Yeah, and I smile when I say this, because I think we've gone from sustainable to regenerative and sometimes resilient, but it is a holistic approach to looking at food production and all aspects of it, and it includes in many cases not just the production. It integrates things like perennials and annuals. It talks about, I mean, you're going to get into this a little later, but we talk about everything from composting. And I think the biggest part, or at least one of the most important parts, is the emphasis on soil health as being sort of the key to agriculture, and then plant health, and then human health. And so we talk about almost circular types of economies within the agricultural sector, but really based on nature's principles. And I can say that now without having to sort of say nature's principle, based on natural cycles and natural principles.
All right, I'm going to say something that may be utterly naive, but it seems like Biden's couple of days of climate plan last week leaned pretty heavily on ag being part of the solution, whether that's a stick or a carrot, kind of incentivizing farmers to sequester carbon, right? So part of me thinks, well, small farmers, independent farmers, specialty crop farmers have been more focused on sequestering carbon and soil health and whatever for years, and have not been all about, kind of the big ag inputs. Are there ways in which we could be rounding a corner and smaller farmers who are kind of doing things the old way, may benefit, financially or otherwise, from this moment that we find ourselves in terms of needing to address greenhouse gas emissions and methane emissions and whatnot? Any of you have a thought?
Real quick, and I don't want to hog, and maybe this will be my last comment, but yes, I think there are a lot of things that are happening there in terms of the, especially when you think of commodity agriculture, you're thinking chemical input, you're thinking fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, chemicals that basically destroy the structure of soil. See, that's the problem. It's just pumping in the needed chemicals. What a regenerative agriculture perspective or approach says is we have to think about the actual structure. We have to think about all those microorganisms that populate the soil that are killed by just pumping chemicals in, but it's those microorganisms that contribute to the actual structure that holds in not only the nutrients but also sequesters soil. And the other part is that in putting the emphasis on small and local, the transportation costs. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, for when I first and there was more, we were paying more for the gasoline to fill these tractor trailers than we were for the food that it was carrying, right? And we just didn't click. So I think when you take all those things into consideration. And by the way, one of the most recent discoveries about the soil carbon sequestering is a concept that really was promoted here in New England. And it sounds so simple, but it's so real. It's crushed rock. I mean, we know about crushed, again, we do, additives of some soils, but now it's real. It's recognized that that's a process that mimics natural, right? Nature does that big thing, volcanoes, earthquakes, and every once in a while that big glacier comes down. Louis Agassiz called it God's great plow, and it did important work, right? Soils. So it's called enhanced weathering now, but it's been really pushed and emphasized here in the Northeast as opposed to the big farms.
So I feel like the pandemic has taught us a lot about the necessity and the importance of small local food systems. And I would like to talk a little bit about the kind of the incubator model and Jen, what you're doing. Can you kind of walk us through how that works and how that benefits, obviously the people who are being incubated or having a concept incubated, but also how it benefits local cultures and communities?
Sure. Yeah. It's I just want to say that when we think about our food system, in some ways, what Greg was getting at is we got to go back to what we used to do, right? Remember when we used to eat with the seasons? Remember when we used to we cared about what was the special on the menu because that was going to be the fresh and local. And now we essentially pay for the abundance of convenience in the United States. So when you think about food waste and you think about all of the things that get in the way of what we do, some amount of that is on the consumer about I want to go into the grocery store and I want there to be perfect avocados, or at least this is what the merchandisers think. I want a perfect avocado and a perfect tomato and a perfect carrot, and I want it 365 days a year. There's an enormous cost to doing that, right? And so we got to get ourselves around that. For the work we do at Commonwealth Kitchen, we come at food as a driver of economic opportunity. Everybody got to eat. We can't offshore all of it, right? How do we create real opportunities and meaningful opportunities, and do that not only through the jobs part in food, because we know that those tend to not always be the best jobs, but can we do it through the businesses by supporting people who want to start businesses and help them really find the pathway to what a successful company can look like. And so that's food trucks, caterers, bakers, product companies, and really trying to focus in on folks who don't typically have access. So how do we level that playing field? So our work is almost entirely focused on women, immigrants, people of color. We talk about our work as being about building a new food economy grounded in racial, social, and economic justice.
So is this microloans, or give us an example of what are the kinds of ways in which you're supporting and sustaining these fledgling businesses?
Yeah, so we don't actually give them any money. We do invest in a ridiculous amount into these businesses. But so think about all of you who, I know everybody who's on the Zoom has my grandma's favorite cookie recipe, or my Nona's favorite sauce, or my whatever it is. And we all think we can be the next Mrs. Fields or whatever it is, right? And the answer, let me just say to all of you, the answer is no, you can't. or you don't really want to, because it's really, really hard. And so my job most of the time is to tell people, don't do it. It's terrible, don't do it. You're gonna lose your shirt. And people do it anyway. Why? Because food is culture, it's our community, it's our family, it's our history, it's love, and that's why. Think about if you were actually gonna start your food business, the biggest cost and the biggest impediment to starting a business is the cost of the kitchen. So our operation, we actually run a shared kitchen. Think about it as a gym membership for food businesses. So if you go to the gym, usually you're on your workout and you're doing your thing, but then Laura, you're the next one using that same equipment. We do the same thing with a kitchen. right? So I might be making my sauce. When I'm done, Greg's going to come in and he's going to make brownies, and then Norbert's going to come in, and everybody's going to pay by the hour to use only the time that they need. And the idea is lower the barrier to the cost of getting started, give people a chance to run hard, fail quick if they're going to fail, or figure out that they're going to make it, and on they go. And so what we do is we provide that kitchen in Dorchester, but we also recognize that it's not enough to have the kitchen. If you don't understand how to take that cookie recipe and scale it, a dozen cookies at home, who cares, right? You're never gonna make any money. You have to sell them for, $50 a cookie, not gonna work. So how do you scale your cookie recipe? Well, you know what? It's chemistry, not math. So if you just triple your cookie recipe, it's gonna be terrible. And so you need somebody who can help you through that process. So we have folks in our staff that will work on everything from recipe scaling, permit, license, what goes on the jar, your food truck, where does the water go? How do I sell? How do I find ingredients? Don't go to the grocery store, where does it go? All the way through to how do we help you actually get access to market? Because think about who we work with. The businesses are largely immigrant women, people of color. So what are they making? They're making stuff of their tradition. So very often it's unfamiliar to somebody who looks like me. Haitian pickles, African peanut sauce, Asian pesto, right? A vegan chicken wing is like one of the new ones. I'm still intrigued by this one. And so part of our work is then trying to help figure out how do we get their stories out and get people to know that these are amazing products. So in fact, many of our products are on the store shelves at places like Whole Foods. That's phenomenal. For Whole Foods buyers, if they're going to actually go and try it. But our businesses don't have money to do the marketing to be able to stand there and come to somebody like me and say, hi, try my Haitian pickles. And so we find ourselves continuing to, like, the structural racism that is in our system continues to make it difficult for our businesses. And so our work is really just how do we reduce the friction, create pathways for these amazing businesses to be able to build incredible companies. And that is, as I say, food trucks, caterers, restaurants. We're doing a lot of work with restaurants right now, because what we also understand is that food is culture and food is community. And we want food that we know. We want to be able to celebrate by going to great restaurants that are owned not just by, the same majority white, especially in a place like Boston that is majority people of color. Like, how do we make sure that the city reflects and the food reflects the people that are there? And so that's really where our work kind of stops and starts. And then within that, we do some manufacturing work. So we're supporting our businesses to scale up. That also means we get to work with farmers. So we actually do have a lot of connections to the farming community where, back to the food waste thing, you think about the time of year for a farmer where, it's the end of August, early or October, I guess it is, all the tomatoes come in. And all of us go to our farmer's market. We're so excited about all those tomatoes. But by the time we get to the end of them, we're just like, oh, no more tomatoes. But the farmers have already produced all those tomatoes because they don't know, is it going to be a drought? Is it going to be good? Are we going to buy it? What's going to happen? So they get to this point where now they have this abundance of tomatoes are going to go bad and they can't do anything with them. And that's where we come in, and we can do things like on-demand processing. So we will take those tomatoes, we'll turn it into tomato sauce. In some cases, they go back to the farmer sells it at their farm stand or the CSA. In other cases, it goes to, we will get it into, grocery stores. We make pesto, a kale and arugula pesto that's actually on the menu at several hospitals randomly, but it's great. We're happy to have it. But it's a way for us to really think about market making. And fundamentally, if you look at what we're doing, this goes back to the beginning of what I said about how broken our food system is. It's all these little pieces that are separated. And our work is really just trying to connect dots.
So I have two questions that basically what you just said brought to mind, one for Norbert and one for Greg. So the whole idea of kind of food is culture. Norbert, you were talking a little bit about food sovereignty and the whole idea of, so I guess my question to you is, how can food assistance and federal food programs operate in a way that reflects a sensitivity to cultural difference and to those issues of food sovereignty, and allow people their dignity and those kinds of things? And then after that, Greg, I'd like to ask you about inclusivity, cultural inclusivity at farmers markets. So Norbert, go ahead.
Sure. I would say the way federal programs work, particularly the largest one, SNAP, is very much oriented to giving people money so that they can make food choices. Where that can run into problems is depending on what grocery stores a person has availability. And if they're coming in from a culture that those foods aren't readily available, then how do you then translate that into other locations where you might buy food? And there are opportunities for people to use their SNAP benefits at farmers markets and other food suppliers. And that can be an important way of helping folks sort of bridge the gap of foods that are culturally relevant. But for the most part, SNAP does, I think, a relatively good job at addressing that, as long as people can find retailers that are providing the kinds of foods that they're looking for. So it is about the availability of those stores and the diversity of the stores that can provide that food. There are other programs, the school lunch program or WIC, where there are some restrictions. And the school lunch program has been shown to be improving in terms of the quality of diets that people are able to get. But the quality, the diversity of foods in terms of culturally relevant foods can be something that depends on the school district and the population there. And so I'm not a school lunch specialist, but I can imagine I've seen those kinds of situations arise. And I had a student who was doing some work looking at summer meals programs, and there were some data that came from folks who were of different backgrounds who said that they couldn't find the foods at those school meal programs because maybe they were kosher, or maybe they were halal and they didn't necessarily have the foods that they needed for their kids. And those are things that can be resolved at the local level. So the money is available, making sure people access them, but it also takes communities to ask for, to demand, to provide those culturally relevant foods for folks.
So
can I just pick up on this for 1 second, which is just to say that, and this goes back, Laura, to your policy question, which is like, so in the USDA rules, typically there's the summer rules and then there's the school time rules, right? And kids, like significant amount of their calories every day are coming from school food. And we know that school food is mixed at best, right? And there are lots of cultural issues with it. And yet when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden, all the rules went out the window, right? We moved to universal. We moved to the summer program being year round. We know in the city of Boston, the YMCA is busy making sure kids are getting meals 7 days a week, not even 5 days a week. So we know that these things can be changed, they can be fixed. And so this to me is where the policy work for me is just like, you got to be kidding me. Like that happened in a heartbeat. And so back to your question about like Biden and what's coming, I just feel like people, if we could do this a year ago, we can do this now. So how do we continue to make those kinds of changes that are going to have the meaningful, lasting impact we want to have? I think it's there, but I think yeah.
I also think there's a shaming factor that we will, at the end of this, we will have had free universal school lunch for almost 2 full school years.
Right.
And how do you walk that back? How do you say, yeah, that was then, but now we're going to go back to the old way where this guy gets a reduced price and this guy gets free and this guy gets nothing, and you have to apply and mom has to come in and you don't, if you're in arrears, you don't get anything. I just think we're going to have a really hard time rescinding that once it gets comfortable.
And here in Massachusetts, our friends at Project Bread are working hard to actually make universal school meals permanent here in Massachusetts, no matter what happens at the national level. So anybody who's interested in that, check out Project Bread and you can learn more about their advocacy work.
Yeah, Vermont is doing this. There are a couple of states that are working on doing the same thing. So Greg, I would like to talk a little bit about farmers markets, because I think farmers markets have been pretty white, and have maybe not been as inclusive historically as they might be. And I would love to get a sense for how that could be different, or what we need to do moving forward.
Yes, and I can speak only obviously for Massachusetts, but I will say that farmers markets were not exclusively white when we first started. As a matter of fact, the markets came out of a state policy. Massachusetts was one of the first states to say, look, the federal program doesn't work for us, so we're going to come up with our own food and agriculture policy. And that was in 1976, because we were losing farms and farmland at an alarming rate. It was pretty clear the trends that began at the end of the Second World War right up to the 70s was that we were going to lose our agricultural sector and the industry entirely. So Fred Winthrop, commission went to Harvard Business School, and he said, look, can you guys come up with a strategy? What can we do as a state? Let's pretend the feds aren't here. And what can we do to stop the hemorrhaging and recapture our agricultural sector? Came out with the policy. There were a couple of big pieces. One was the Agricultural Preservation Restriction Program, which purchased the development rights of farm. It allowed the farmers to keep their farmland by putting a restriction on it and preserving it forever in agriculture. The state paid the farmers the difference between the development value and the agricultural value, and they purchased the right to develop it. The farmers got the money. That kept the farmland in agriculture, but the other part was how do we keep the farmers? And one of the big programs was direct marketing, farmers markets. It also included roadside stands and others, but he said, look, we got to cut out as many middle people as possible for farmers who want that option and make that direct link. Oldest marketing system in the world, right? It's not like it's met, but to do that in the 20th century in urban and with zoning and all the sort of, it became a problem. But the key was that when we developed them, and this was what I was doing this back in 78, this was my first encounter with the Department of Agriculture, we targeted low-income communities. So let's do two things. Let's help the farmers and let's help the residents, right? That need access to fresh, nutritious, affordable food. And so the markets were in Dorchester, in Roxbury, and they expanded out for a time. And so they were being supported by customers. And I just want a little caveat here. In many cases, we couldn't compete with price. I mean, people said, well, this has got to be more affordable because you're so close, you're not importing it from California. And I remember a Boston Globe reporter going up to a woman with her two kids, and she was at the market. He says, well, you know, this isn't less expensive. As a matter of fact, it might be a little bit more expensive. Why are you coming to the farmer's market? And she looked at him and said, look at them. And the kids were eating raw peas. She says, they're eating it. Does it make more sense to pay a little less and have the stuff thrown out and because half the plate isn't eaten? So that was sort of an educational piece. What's happened over the years, though, is that the markets have become trendy. And as the foodies, and I'm just going to be honest here, right, and got involved, they became more enamored. They wanted to go to farmers markets, and they began to influence, which does happen, right, the direction of the market, the style of the market. And then when the SNAP and the food assistance programs that targeted farmers markets came into being, you can now exchange, EBT, now let's go and use farmers markets. It attracted a lot more people, a lot more low-income people, a lot more non-English speaking people to these markets. And it created tension. And that tension was with folks who said, all of a sudden, now you're blocking, the lines are becoming longer and the delays are there because you're having to explain to folks and they don't speak English. And to the point, and I'm not kidding, to the point where some people are saying, well, maybe we need, and this is just within one community, we need two markets. One for the right, one for the not. And whoa, fortunately, the Mass Food System Collaborative said, we have to address this. And we held a couple of workshops on inclusion. And we did it with market managers and vendors and some consumers to try to figure out, let's not let this get any worse. Let's address this. And part of that is recounting the history, right? Where we came from and what these markets, how they originated and what their original purpose was. But then we also did things to try to address some of the legitimate concerns. And some of that could be as simple as signage, market rules. The other thing that did come into play, though, just picking up on what Norbert and Jen mentioned earlier, there are cultural differences too. Folks from other countries don't see markets the same way that we do necessarily. As a
more haggling, less lines.
Everybody stands in line, and there's no pushing and shoving. It's a chaotic and fun place, but that was interpreted by some folks as being rude or just no manners and that sort of thing. So we've really been working hard to sort of address that through the Mass Food System Collaborative. We published sort of our results in our toolkit to help market vendors and market managers, for the most part, how they can make their markets more inclusive. And some of that, some of that's with music, some of that's with signage, right? That has the rules in different languages. Some of it is really emphasizing that we welcome SNAP and right, WIC and all those there, so that there's no hesitancy on that. But it was really kind of almost cascading into a real issue. But I think thanks to some intervention by Mass Food and others, that it's a food collaborative, that it's acknowledged. That's the first part, right? It's acknowledged that we have a problem and we're addressing it. And this is not just Massachusetts, by the way, because we did our research and realized that this was going on in other states around the country.
So I'd like to back up a little bit and talk about Black farmers, kind of in a broader sense. So from what I've read, Black farmers have lost something like 15 million acres in the past 100 years through a variety of kind of mercenary business practices or lack of access to USDA loans and programs, or heirs property, where they may, a farmer may die and his property may be disseminated to all of his legal heirs and then kind of sold off at, sub-market value. So obviously this is a lot. There's a lot of conversation about reparations, not just for Black farmers, but for African Americans in general, but for Black farmers specifically, for all of this land that's been lost. And there have been two fairly substantive acts aimed at setting things to right in as much as can be done legislatively in a short period of time. And Biden has talked a little bit about that, and Vilsack has talked quite a bit about that. So Norbert, I'd love to get your take on kind of what should happen moving forward, and what you think will happen.
Well, what should happen is we go back in time and we resolve these problems, because, and I say that, I try to smile about it, but it is a deeply frustrating reality that a lot of damage has been done, and I'm not sure if we really can go back to a place where we're able to restore things. And I do believe that things can be restored, but I'm not sure about this particular issue. I don't want to sound pessimistic. I just know that we've lost generations of farmers, Black farmers particularly, who will find it really difficult to get back. I mean, if you're off the land, if you're not engaged in that, having worked at colleges of agriculture, it is just a real challenge. It has been a challenge of recruiting students of color into colleges of agriculture. So in terms of even academic training, there can be some real challenges. Now, that's not to say that it's everywhere. There are some amazing folks doing on the ground work to try to resolve some of these issues, but it's going to take time. So we can't just imagine that, if you will, throwing money at the problem will solve it. We will take the money. The money is useful. It will resolve some things, but there is a real effort to work on training and recruitment and encouragement, and everything from mentorship to other activities to say, one, you can do this. Two, here are the structures that help you do it. And here are the financial resources that can allow that to go forward. So the money is needed. And I know there's some people who have pushed back on that. There are some folks who say, well, if there was a decline in farming in general in terms of the number of farmers, it's just a natural sort of result of the expansion of some farmers. But there's some clear evidence. The Pickford case is an example of, we know that there were things that were done wrong in terms of Black farmers. And it wasn't just Black farmers, it's other farmers of color.
Can you give people the 30-second version? I know that's almost impossible. The 30-second version of Pickford, because I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with those two cases.
Sure. The 1994 Pickford case, Pickford versus Vilsack, was a lawsuit that was finally resolved that recognized discriminatory policies at USDA towards Black farmers. And what happened is that a lot of decisions in terms of who got access to financial resources was done at the county level, at the local level. And therefore, I grew up in Georgia. I've lived in the South. I'm happy to be in the South. I love the South, but there were some problems with where a lot of the Black farmers were. There were problems and challenges for folks to get
when you say at the local level, explain what you mean by that, because I think most people don't understand that USDA has local offices where farmers go in.
Sure. So county offices were making decisions about eligibility for different programs. While there might have been federal guidelines, the decision was at the county level, or even the application and the processing took place at the county level. And so my understanding is that people were discouraged and or basically not permitted to get access to those programs at that level.
It's
And
kind of like
correct me.
redlining.
That's right.
For those who know that term. So you think about in an urban setting, redlining, like banks won't lend in certain communities and to certain people. The USDA has been doing the exact same thing, especially in the South in rural communities where they're not funding the farms. And when they are, it's very predatory terms that they're using.
Absolutely. And I know we're near the end. Ooh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
I was going
Greg.
to say, I know we're getting near the end, but I also just, in terms of, from my perspective, what should, and again, given the political climate, it's hard to imagine, for instance, that the Justice for Black Farmers bill, right, that would literally say, we're going to buy farms and then we're going to make 160 acres available to Black residents, no strings attached. And people say, well, and again, it gets to this point, well, who wants to do this? I will say that one of the things I've witnessed over the years is a resurgence in interest in African Americans to farm. They want to farm. Access to land as part of that 160 acres. Well, you think back to the Oklahoma land rush, that's what basically happened, right? I'm going to be honest here. The government took the land, stole the land back from Native Americans and said, we're going to make this available to white settlers from here and Europe. By the way, you can come over and you can also go after this land. Not indigenous folks and not African Americans. You can't do it. So if you could, it's hard to imagine with this bifurcated right Congress and that you would get a passage of a bill that would make millions of acres of land, or thousands, tens of thousands, whatever, of land available at no cost and no strings attached. But it would be, right? Because there were no qualification. You did have to, when you could settle that land back in the Oklahoma rush, you did have to show that you could do something on it and got 5 years so that you could sort of keep it. So my thing would be, you do that. But you also, and this isn't a proposal yet, but it was an interesting, provocative article that suggested that the U.S. should also return the national park land to indigenous peoples. So that because land is what it's all about. You start talking about, the wealth gap and how do you sort of close that wealth gap. You're not going to, two ways you can do it. One is with land. The other is what Jen is doing is businesses owned by right folks. So but you need the land in many cases to get. So anyway, that's where I would sort of say, that's where I'd come down.
So for people who are not in farming, I think one thing that people don't understand, they say, oh, well, it's Darwinian, some people succeed and some people fail. But every farmer, just about every farmer of any size, takes out loans every year for seed, for inputs, for equipment. And then they pay those back once they've harvested. So it's this cycle of constant borrowing and constant paying back. And if you're always at the end of the line or getting your loan late or getting a worse rate or whatever, you can never effectively compete.
And that's assuming that you get in the line.
Right.
All right, so we have just a few minutes before we are out of time and going to move into these small groups. I would love to get a sense, maybe a minute each, kind of what you're hopeful for right now. I mean, I think it's always nice to end on that kind of note. What are the things that you think our food system is obviously very broken, and food justice is a thorny issue that we clearly did not resolve this past hour. But I would love to get a sense from each of you. What are you most excited about looking to the future? So Norbert, how about we start with you?
Sure. So what am I excited about for the future? I do want to, in addressing that, I'll talk about some folks who are doing some interesting work who are trying to help solve these problems. And I want to be clear about, I did say that it is hard to recruit folks of color into colleges of agriculture, but you do see a lot of work in communities where people are trying to rectify some of these problems. So if we're going to talk specifically of this, so when I think of Leah Penniman at Soul Fire Farm, Heber Brown, who's a part of the Black Church Food Security Network, they are out there trying to do the work of encouraging, promoting, and seeing farmers of color make it and be successful and meet the needs of communities. So I see something wonderful in that. And while it is important for the federal government to do its part, and I'm completely in support of that, it is also going to take folks in communities to stand up and to fight and to create opportunities for folks. So I'm hopeful for that. I'm also hopeful for, and it's unfortunate that we had to go through a pandemic, but I think the pandemic has changed the way we see what we can do. And I think we will see things that are different. And you brought it up. It's going to be hard to walk some of these policy changes back. And I hate that we went through all of this, but maybe we will see a new light because of what we saw that we can do in these new spaces. And I'll just end one last thing. I agree that I think it takes all kinds of farmers to be successful. And I also know that there's an important role of science and technology, as well as traditional production practices working together. It's going to take all of us contributing the things that we have to make this system work, or at least work better. And so I'm hopeful for those things.
Thank you so much, Norbert. Jen, how about you?
It was a really, 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 really hard year for people in restaurant, hospitality, which is where we work. So honestly, I'm hopeful because anything's better than that. And we're getting rid of the masks and everything else. So just a little, let's just set some expectations. But truly, I feel like there is a bit more of the nuanced understanding of what is the challenge of our food system, and the fact that, we talk about food insecurity. There are some people talk about it as like the food swamp when you think about some neighborhoods and where the issues are. It's not that there isn't food. It's that it's really crappy food. And the food that's there is largely, and it's cheap, right? So why is it McDonald's, the burger is cheaper than the salad? Like, come on, right? And all the fast food, it's in all the low-income neighborhoods, right? So the more that people are talking and thinking about the work like what we do, where we are able to get out into those communities, celebrate the cultural traditions, right? Like, all of us want to eat well and eat healthy, and lots of immigrant communities, like, you look at what their food traditions are, they eat a hell of a lot better than we do in the United States. They all come here and they eat the American diet, and that's when things go wrong. And so if we can continue to embrace the connective tissue, I'm excited about where we can go. I'm excited to see, in places like Dorchester, the number of vegan restaurants that are showing up, and all sorts of cultures that's showing up, and people excited about that, and more people interested in how we connect and collaborate, right? So if you think about what the last year has meant, all the hardship, it also has brought a lot of people together in really different ways. And many of those, because it's been going on so long, we've actually built new ways of working. And so I'm really excited about how the connective tissue can now create something different. And because the food system, it is so complex, the more we make those connections and hold tight to them, the more likely we can build the food economy we want to see. So
thank you so much, Jen. Greg, I'd love to end with you.
Sure. I would say that I'm most hopeful when I see the young people who are really taking this on and are, in some cases, even sort of recreating the old organizing sort of strategies, how to get things done. Urban agriculture. I mean, amazing and hopeful when you see government officials respond. I mean, the late Tommy Menino saw that there was interest, and the Boston mayor Menino saw there was interest, and he took this incredible step. He said, let's zone the city of Boston for commercial farming. Now that's huge. You're right. Those are, words can come out, you can do a lot of things, but when zoning says you're for real, and zoning you can take to the bank, right? If you're looking to finance. So that to me was incredible. And you've got these young urban farmers who maybe that's where they're going to get trained. Maybe we're going to get the reparations, but they're getting some real training. I'm serious, right? On the ground, they're doing this sort of work. And also there are these schools. I've worked with a couple of folks, and one particular from the Conway School of Landscape Architecture. He graduated, we got together. He said, would you mind if I call you every once in a while? Would you mind mentoring me? And I said, yes. And after the first call, I said, okay, this is no longer mentoring, this is co-mentoring. I want you, he was teaching me so much about these tools that he was using and these approaches. And I'm sort of saying, oh, where was this? But his excitement and but it's sort of infectious. That's there. So I think we're going to be in good hands with young people who are going to take this and not settle for anything less than success and a regenerative, just food system. So that's where I wake up, why I wake up and why I keep doing it, and get my energy from them.
Well, thank all of you. I mean, this has been a wonderful hour. We could have spoken for many more. I would like to turn over to Harry Selker, who is the Dean of Tufts Clinical and Translational Science Institute, for his final thoughts and to kind of take us home.
Well, everybody went away from the pictures, but I know you're all there. Laura, thank you for moderating that, and thank you, Jen, Greg, and Norbert, for those great comments. I learned a lot, and it was just really inspiring. Thank you very, very much. You know, first, besides thanking you for that, I want to just tell you that we really value, as we mentioned in the beginning, our relationship with the Museum of Science, and this is just the kind of thing that we really care about. We want to have authentic, meaningful conversations about translating all the great science we hear about into actual lives, which means nutrition for people, and secure and sovereign. I like that, nutrition. And you know, the speakers who I think got us thinking about this, I'm hoping now in the breakout sessions that you'll really be able to start from there and go further to think about how this applies to your own lives, your own communities, and how we can be activated to do something about it. I really appreciate you coming to this and staying for the breakout sessions, and wish you great conversations. And back to you now, Emily.
Thank you so much, Harry. Our partnership with the Tufts CTSI, it's been an incredible opportunity, and we're just so grateful for all of the people on that team who really helped make this event possible and brought these fantastic panelists together. So thank you again for being here, and thank you to everyone who came today, and one huge thank you to our fantastic panelists and our moderator. I wish we could all give you a round of applause, but just know that we are also thankful and appreciative of you spending your time with us today. I would just like us all to know that for those of you here joining on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, we're now going to stop streaming to those platforms. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you again soon. And thank you all again.